Oh, good morning, good morning, good morning. This has nothing to do with Stephen Fry or that show, Quite Interesting, but it is a quite interesting topic, I think. I've had this thing in my channel where I've said most of the problems in the world occur because of how we define X rather than what X actually is. And I also have the whole thing, different things happen for the same reasons, and the same things happen for different reasons. And I think I'm going to add a fourth thing to this. When we define something, we are also stating what it isn't. And I think that is something that is kind of lost on people in the way we generally work with things. And I think compartmentalization is one of the main things that does that. And with that topic, I'm going to be talking about the Jamies Winston issue. And Jamies Winston is a quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which is an American football team in Florida. And he also played for the Florida State University Seminoles. And this is pertinent to it. He is also an African American male, and there have been some issues in the NFL from mostly African American males in the NFL talking about how general society treats African American males when it comes to crime, and also the treatment of players by the league itself, talking about racial issues and things like that. And in this particular issue, there's an issue with crime. Apparently, James Winston, 2 years ago, this is 2018 right now, I think this case actually this situation stems from something that happened in 2016. And from what I've gotten from this, he was out with some friends, he got drunk, he got in a vehicle, an Uber, which is a ride sharing service, and when he was in this Uber, he somehow got into the front seat of the car. I don't know if he was there with the friends in the back, but he was in the front seat of the car, and then it is reported that the driver, who was a female, she says that he touched her inappropriately against her consent. Apparently, it was just touching over the clothes. This is what the person claimed, and the person did do a police report. I think they went to BuzzFeed, which is a news website organization. And from then on, the NFL researched into this. They went through the process, and they have a conduct policy that they recently enacted. And this is what it says, a notable excerpt from that conduct policy. It says violations involving assault, battery, domestic violence, or sexual assault will result in a baseline 6-game suspension. More games possible if aggravating factors are present, such as the use of a weapon or crime against child. Second offense will result in banishment from the league. So this is the general thing, and Jameis Winston got 3 games suspension. This is 2 years later. Some of the things Jameis Winston has said in this report that I've seen, I saw one report that I'm probably going to have clips of after this video, but one of the main things I saw him say was that he has talked to the person, they have settled this outside of court, so this has not gone to court, it has not been found, he's not been found guilty in a law court, but he's admitted to wrongdoing in the situation. He has taken alcohol out of his life. He has said he has tried to commit some restitution, and of course, in a situation like this, not of course, but I mean, this should be understood that in a situation like this, the interested parties, the National Football League, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the woman herself that was involved in this incident, probably Uber in some extent, but these people have a lot more information about what actually happened and the process behind this before they come to this situation of the 3-game suspension, before Jameis Winston says what he says, before the female in question does go out and actually pursue more. Say, I want this taken to court. I'm not going to accept the settlement, or I'm not going to accept whatever has happened here. Why does it end where it ends? There's a lot of extenuating circumstances that we do not know about. So me personally, I am focusing on the reaction to this 3-game suspension and the treatment of Jameis Winston, and just the treatment of these kind of cases of assault. I've had several videos on it talking about how there's a lack of consistency in this thing, and I personally really like consistency, but it's not really carried out. Now, on this panel, on this specific show that I watched, it was one black female analyst, 2 white male analysts. I think they might have played, I can double check, and then one analyst who was a black male analyst that was a former player in the National Football League. And they did this entire almost 40-minute show. It was on NFL Total Access or something. And I'm going to probably go over some clips after this, as I mentioned, just kind of giving some comments to defend what I'm saying here. First of all, the general reaction from that former offensive, I think he's offensive or defensive lineman, the larger black guy in this show. I think his name is Damien. He goes on and he gets very emotional, and you'll see in the clips he's somewhat emotional and verbose about what he's saying. And it is an emotional situation whenever a female has been assaulted in this manner, because I think we are a gynocentric society. I think we are a gynocentric society, as with most mammals in general in our evolutionary environment. The female's safety is paramount, is usually held over the male's safety because they are the controlling factor in reproduction. This is something that's hardwired into our genes. If you did not prioritize female comfort and female safety over your comfort, over the male safety in whatever environment you were in our evolutionary environment, your species or your village, your town, your whatever gene pool in that area would end. Like soon enough, it would be over. If you have a situation where you have 50, you have 100 of humans in an evolutionary environment, you have 50 males and 50 females, and then you get a situation where something happens, there's some kind of danger that occurs, and 40 males die. With those 10 males, you can reproduce, you can repopulate that village, that tribe, in a matter of generations. But if you have a situation where 40 to 49 females die and you're only allowed with one female and you have 15 males, you're not going to be able to recover. Chances are that tribe or that area is going to be over. And this is hardwired into our genetics, and it's still there. And then with this situation, with the dynamic here, the female reporter did come out with issues towards this, and she has that in-group bias also, where it's a positive bias because it protects people. Females tend to come together and come out for each other's defense in a way that males don't do quite as much. And she comes out and she's discussing things supporting the female and things like that. And the black male, Damien, he seems to come out and virtue signal to the female and respond off of that, and probably some things based on his background, which I might get into also in the clips. But here we go. This was my initial comment, and I'll just read the comment that I had, and the comment somebody else responded. Then I'll go into more of the actual indications. But try to listen to what I'm saying about this. Remember, I'm talking about the situation in general. I'm talking about the interaction on this panel, and anyway, just check this out. Okay, some added background on Jamies Winston before reading what was written here. That my response, somebody else's response, my response to their response, because without this information, some of this doesn't necessarily make any sense. Jamies Winston himself has had a history of, at least he has had one situation when he was in college. He was accused of raping somebody. I think that situation was an actual rape and not an assault. Excuse me, I don't mean not an assault. I mean not just an assault. It's because it's harassment. Harassment is a form of assault. Rape is a form of assault. Situation. The accusation, as I mentioned in the situation, was inappropriate touching while drunk. In college, it was more of actual intercourse involving thing where actual sexual relations occurred, not just touching of a sexual nature. So that situation, he was not found guilty for it. I think he might have received 1 game suspension or something like that for just the accusation coming up. People were wondering, is this male privilege? Is this a protection of athletes? I don't think there was any racial kind of connotation brought up to say, is it protection of black athletes versus white women? I did not know if the accuser was white in this situation, but that is a situation that was brought up, and it's pertinent because it's brought up in my estimation of what was going on in this actual panel show. So, to open up the panel show, the female analyst goes in, and as I mentioned before, there is a situation where people have in-group bias, and it's positive for females to come together in the defense of each other because we are a gynocentric species, and it makes sense that males will prioritize female protection, but doubly works in that situation for females. They already prioritize female protection. They prioritize their protection as females. They can also empathize in a kind of way. And it's kind of a thing as a female, if you're not demanding of protection, chances are you won't be protected as much as that another female that is, and your genes don't come through. And there's a beautiful, amazing thing of how epigenetics and how evolution and how selective reproduction actually passes down certain genes that shape the actual. And I have a lot of interest in that, but that's somewhat here, but not quite there for what I'm talking about here. I'm going to go back over there to where I was, or it's there. It's over there, but I'm going to stay here. So it's not neither here nor there. It's not here, but it is over there. So just I'm going to shove that to the side of the screen here and get back to the question at hand here. So the female reporter goes in and she's talking about it, and she actually states in some cases, I am doing this from a female point of view, etc., etc., and that makes sense. And I have a somewhat of an understanding why females have been brought into certain, I think, predominantly male spaces, but I don't really. Anyway, that's for a separate video. But she comes in and says that, and then the ex-football player Damien, the larger black male, he goes in and he starts getting a bit emotional about this. And I mentioned that yes, there's a reason to get emotional about this, and he says something about in the start how he's not going to talk about the FSU situation, the past. He's going to actually focus on this issue, which I don't necessarily think is done, and I don't necessarily think is a necessarily positive thing. People's past behavior should be brought into account, but I'll get into that after reading this. So anyway, that was just the introduction. So here we go. Virtue signaling black male playing up to black female, not stereotypical. Say you aren't litigating FSU, Florida State University, and then you proceed to repeatedly bring it up. Speak about how misunderstood and demonized black athletes are treated, and then start flipping out about this situation. 6 games is a baseline punishment. Consistency is not consistently applied. He was drunk. Males can't rely on saying they were drunk, so they have no certainty, or they have a lack of culpability when it comes to sexual situations. Females often say they were too drunk to consent. So that was the statement that I initially made, and it did include some grammatical errors and typos, so maybe that is part of why this person responded in this way. But anyway, let me read what he said and then go into my further response to what he said. So this is what he said. Raping a drunk person and saying it's okay because they were drunk is absurd. Using your drunkenness as an excuse for violating a person is also absurd. In both cases, you're saying it's somehow the victim's fault. It can never be the victim's fault, and when someone rapes them, even if they're drunk themselves. If someone robs you when you're intoxicated, is it your own fault that you got robbed, or the robber is innocent? There are defenses one can make for Jamies here, but you're definitely not making them, and you're only making it worse. So that's what the person said, and this is my response. It goes into some length because as I open up with this, let me just read the response, because there's some things in there that I directly address in my response, and I agreed with a lot of what he said here, and you'll see that in my response. So this was my response. You make a grand case. Now I hope you read this and respond. Truly thought that posting this may have been a waste on a non-official account, but your answer is intriguing, because this was an account of somebody who just gets the actual footage of the show and then posts it up online. It wasn't the official NFL Total Access channel with this, but people post up different videos and things like that, and I watch them occasionally. So back to the response. So opening up, this isn't a case of rape. You're begging the question by defining it as such. It is an accusation of sexual assault. Rape is a sort of sexual assault, and so is forcibly kissing somebody. If you can't tell the difference, then fair enough. Just hope you are not on a jury, though they often have tests to understand who gets the issue when they have juries and things like that. The court of public opinion, though, is litigated by random people like me and you, talking to him in that situation, or me and you out there, or anybody listening to this. When we hear this, we just go, oh, we don't understand the law, but we can litigate this. So I say, please indicate where I defend Winston from what he has been accused of and subsequently taken responsibility for and allegedly made some steps to address. I even state that he, as a male, cannot use drunkenness as an excuse. He chose to drink. He knows what drinking does to the mind. I just pointed out that I'd like consistency to go across gender lines in alcohol-related rulings. And I don't think it will because of human nature, and that makes, and the fact that females are different from males. If I leave my car unlocked on a busy street, I am not responsible for it being stolen for sure, but I can have done things to avoid this. So your language of saying victim is noted as well. The term victim blaming is somewhat hyperbolic, since by definition, the person is already a victim. Even the person victim blaming, when that actually occurs, must at first admit that the person you accuse them of doing this at or blaming has already been victimized, which is also an admission that someone has done something wrong to them. And let me expand on this point a bit. Pretty much, if I say, okay, this person, the whole car situation, if I say, look, you come to the station and then you report that somebody stole my car, and we find the person who is in possession of your car, we have footage of the person taking that vehicle, we have an official status that yes, you are actually a victim of robbery in this situation. Nobody is saying you haven't been victimized by this person completely stealing your vehicle. We get to that situation and then we say, okay, that person has stolen your vehicle. But then you ask that person, why were you in this neighborhood? Why were the keys in the car? Why was the car unlocked? That is not victim blaming, that is assessing the situation. And I've seen this recent story of this 17-year-old guy that got into a vehicle, was stole this car from an off-duty police or fire an off-duty fireman. I think this was in Chicago or somewhere like that, Detroit. And he was a 17-year-old guy. He got in the car. The off-duty fireman had a gun or something, or he was a deputy marshal or something. He pulls out his gun and he tells the person, get out of the car. The person doesn't get out. As he's driving by, I think he shoots through the window and the guy dies. And the definition of this guy was a 17-year-old. There's some lady who said she saw this, said, oh, I can't imagine having to see a little boy die on the street. 17-year-old. In this situation, somebody was saying, well, I mean, you don't leave your car unlocked, or you should let the person go with the car, you don't shoot for this. Is that victim blaming? Because the person was a victim of somebody trying to steal his car. By saying he shouldn't have shot this person, he should have let insurance take care of the situation, are people victim blaming the person who's had the car stolen? I don't think people would consider that victim blaming, but that goes to the lack of consistency that I see in situations like this. So back to my response. So lastly, this driver was not drunk, but you want to conflate the situation. If you get drunk and drive and crash your car, no one is hurt. You are still responsible for getting drunk. If you hit someone else and they die, you are almost always found responsible in a court of law for at least negligible homicide, even if that person you hit was walking across the street was drunk. Assuming this person was walking across at a crosswalk and the street light was red for you, so you can still be found completely responsible for having hit this person, even if you yourself are drunk. So sure, if Winston was drunk, he is still accountable. And where did I say he is not? Did I say he shouldn't receive any suspension? But in most situations, people like you will gender the issue and, in an act of disrespect, take away any part of the agency females have in these situations, if both parties are drunk. So please read through sufficiently if you choose to respond, and feel free to indicate where I have said things instead of just making these baseless accusations. So, last questions. If a man is drunk and a sober female kisses him, has she sexually assaulted him? What if the man is over the legal driving limit wherever he may be, and his wife has sexual intercourse with him? Is that rape? If the drunk man instead stumbles into a store and buys a multi-thousand-dollar watch, has he been robbed? Was he able to consent to the purchase of this watch, or that kiss, or the sexual intercourse with his wife? So that was my general kind of idea with this, and this is my issue with this in several ways when it comes to these situations. They're treating this as just jumping to the point of saying, yes, this is a rape. Whenever people do that, then yes, of course, rape is one of the most horrible things and should be prosecuted or should receive the highest level of justice. And establishing that a rape has occurred once that has happened should be held as a horrible situation. But even if this is something that 100% occurred, to try and say that somebody being drunk in a vehicle, touching somebody in an inappropriate way, being told to stop, then stopping, then leaving the vehicle is equivalent to actual sexual assault, aggravated sexual assault, where there's involving penetration and other kind of things that go on for an extended amount of time. That is not correct. I think that is an overestimation, or it's an exaggeration of the situation, and to come down on somebody as harshly for that, now that's another issue. Now, another extended issue with this, as I mentioned before, was the man Damien saying he's not going to litigate, not going to bring up that Florida State University situation, but then he invariably is not able to stick to that and brings it up. And past behavior is a indication of future behavior. That I completely agree. And he's exasperated and he says, why does this keep following this guy? Why does this keep happening? Now remember, this happened in 2016, at least 2 years ago. He was a younger man. Even later on in one of the clips, the female analyst talks about how he's 24. So let's say he was doing things in high school, in college. So in college, he would have been in his teens. That could have been in his teens. Okay, let's say he was out to 20, so he could have started college at 17, 18, 19, 20. And no, I don't think he stayed for the whole 4 years. So maybe he was 18, 20, 19, and then got into the league for 2 years. I think he's on his fifth year coming up now. So if he's 24 now, he could have entered at 20. So possibly he was 18 when this sexual assault occurred in college. Now, as I mentioned in that previous story, when that black youth had gone into the vehicle, that 17-year-old had gone in and stolen the car and had been shot dead as he was trying to escape with the stolen vehicle, people in that story were talking about how it is so sad to see a young boy. I can't imagine having to see a young boy in the street. And his sister, a 20-year-old, had started this protest movement to say, oh, you shouldn't be able to shoot somebody if they steal your vehicle. And I disagree with that. I think if somebody steals your vehicle, they have got into a situation where they have aggressed against you, and they really have no logical explanation, expectation to not receive some kind of retribution as you attempt to regain possession of your own property. So anyway, I think this is just my estimation that back in the past they may have considered that with his youth, and they, of course, like Cenk Uygur says, Young Turks, they had also accounted for that, hey, this guy is also a star quarterback on our football team and he's bringing in millions to the school. He could get us a national championship. So we are going to treat this in a different way, because people, even all men, are not the same, let alone are men and women the same, boys and girls, different races. As I had in this different video, by definition, when you say something is something else, if you give it a title or give it a name, then you're dividing it from other things. So there's reasons these things are different. So now, when it comes to this situation, if you're just focusing on age in and of itself, why is a boy at 17 stealing a vehicle, or somebody at 17 stealing a vehicle, being called a dying boy in the street? Yet Jamies Winston, in this situation, should be held entirely accountable as an adult for his behavior at that time. That's the kind of inconsistency I see. I think you should hold these people at 17, 18. People are rather responsible in a way, but they still have some agency over their actions. But there is a de-escalation from the behavior that he's done. Apparently, now he's getting to the point where he stops. But that continued behavior. So now in a situation where when African American males, or just anyone in general, has a previous police record, has a previous criminal record, and they get in altercations with police and law enforcement officers, and they get shot or they get arrested at a higher clip, then people start wondering, why are these people being treated in a different way? The whole NFL taking a knee process was based off of this in a large part, saying black people are disproportionately put in prison. But you look at the actual test and you look at people who have similar backgrounds, similar criminal histories, and they are imprisoned at the similar rate. It just happens to be that young African American males, I think between the ages of 17 and 35, commit crime at a higher rate, or at least found guilty of crimes at a higher rate than anyone else. So there's a lot that goes into that. So as this man Damien was pointing out, it was very hard for him to completely disconnect what happened with Jameis in this incident versus what happened in the past. But then if you look at past behavior, since this situation happened, Jameis Winston has continued playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's continued to help in the society, in the culture, which is something that a lot of people talk about. NFL players, where people are wondering, oh, why are NFL players doing this? Why are they taking a knee? Why are they pretending to be our moral superiors? And people point out, hey, NFL players do a lot in their community. They give back. They go out and they do kids programs. They do this and this. They do that and that. And yes, I do agree that they do this. And Jameis Winston has been doing that. Jameis Winston has also admitted that he has taken alcohol out of his life. Maybe he's finally gotten to the point where he's like, okay, no more of this. And I know that struggle personally. I've had issues with eating, with food. I was a lot more obese. I'm trying to work on that. I haven't had issues with drinking before, but I actually got into the process of just not drinking. I don't think I've had a drink in almost 2.5 years now, but it's not like drinking was a big thing in my life before. I didn't start drinking until after high school and then had times taking off. But I know about having certain addictions or certain issues with things and struggling to kind of get off of it. And again, as I mentioned in my response to this man here who had this response to my comment, I am not defending Winston. I'm just trying to parse out the situation and understand the situation better. So that's not completely taken away, yet you have situations when they're talking about what I'm talking about, people's objection and defense of the kneeling movement, saying that black people are treated in a different way. It's not all black people, first of all. It's people who have past histories, and they're saying that past histories are crime. In some of these people who people are taking a knee over are in that situation. Now I'm going to get to some of these clips and just give some reviews or some information about them.
Hearing that, and just anybody who obviously doesn't approve of a behavior like this, regardless of your gender or sex, I think that you need a little bit more of an explanation as to what happened there.
She goes on to say later on in this panel that an explanation should be given, and maybe it's not to the media, and that's what I agree with. It's not to the media. She may not understand, we may not understand why it's 3 games instead of 6, but the explanation doesn't have to be given to the general public.
Sound like to me, leagues, that's like definition of sexual assault. You're inappropriately touching someone without their consent.
So no disagreement with the definition of sexual assault here. Physically touching somebody in a sexual manner without their consent is assault. Now, cat whistling, which sometimes is conflated with that, like somebody walks down the street, you whistle, hey mommy, what's up? Things like that. That is sexual harassment. Now, all sexual assault is a form of sexual harassment, but not all sexual harassment is sexual assault. Now, when you go to the specifics about the assault itself, what kind of assault is it? Different things happen for the same reasons. You can be punished for the same reason of sexual assault, but the punishment itself will differ depending on what sort of assault that it was.
You changed the policy to 6 games. So what bumps it from 6 to 3? To me, that's what's maddening about the league. There's no like consistency or like transparency. Why did you go from 6 to 3?
As I mentioned, what Jamies Winston was reported to have done, touched somebody inappropriately, is not the same as a physical aggravated rape with a weapon under the duress of somebody you're holding the person down, etc. And that's what the policy says. The baseline punishment is going to differ depending on the extenuating circumstances. Just like at that issue with the stolen car that I mentioned before, the person was saying, the sister of the brother was saying, look, he's getting away anyway. Doesn't have a gun. Why don't you just let insurance deal with it? She's arguing that, yes, I do understand he's committed a crime, but his punishment, getting shot and dying, is not accurate, does not fit the crime that was actually committed.
When you said in your own statement that her story is credible. So, for me, like NFL, somebody has some explaining to do.
So right here, somebody's got some explaining to do. This is what I was mentioning at the start of the video that I would talk about in the clips. I am almost 100% certain that sometime in his childhood, repeatedly, an adult that was in charge of him would come up to him when something wrong has happened and say, "Somebody's got some splaining to do." And in most cases, when somebody says this, they are not in the position, or they're not going to be willing to explain exactly why they are actually mad at you. With him getting emotional in this sense, I'm seeing this as some kind of flashback to things like that. I'm just going by the numbers in general. People in the African American community, also here in Kenya, black people hit their kids a lot, and somebody's got some explaining to do, often comes with some form of aggression following it. Now, in this situation, instead of sitting down and explaining, the parent explaining why they're mad, they will go and say, "You have to explain to me exactly what you did, why you did it, how you did it, what you were thinking while you doing it." But they're not going to explain that. Instead, they're going to aggress against you.
You wrote it in your own statement. So somebody needs to explain where you go from 6 to 3. Because that's been the chief concern that most people have had with the National Football League.
Now, right here, what he's saying here, I'm going to say, I'm proposing that this actual sentiment is completely correct. That's the frustration people have in the NFL in this situation, but not just this situation, also the kneeling situation. People have a frustration with law enforcement setting laws and then treating the punishment in different ways. Why is it when X person does something, they're treated in this way, and then when Y person does something, they're treated in this way? They put it in a racial sense. They claim that if a white person commits the same crime as a black person, the white person will be arrested calmly. Like often say this with shooters. "Oh, this white person shot up this place. He was arrested calmly and taken into custody." Yet a black person, either shooting up a place or even doing a lesser crime, he'll be shot dead. Now, I disagree with that characterization, but I do agree with the arbitrary nature of the way the state enforces its laws. And I think with sports, you can learn a lot from it, and people might be able to be people might be getting woke to this issue and seeing, like, hey, wait, this actually applies to more than just this particular situation.
Transparency and consistency. Be consistent.
Again, agree with Damon here. Be consistent. That's what I'm saying here. If you're saying men and women are the same, should be treated the same, should have the same access to things, then when it comes to them being drunk, if a man is responsible for his actions when drunk, then a female holds responsibility for her actions when drunk as well. Now, the actions taken are different, so the treatment of what has been done is going to be different. I personally don't think men and women are the same. If everything that was good for the goose would be good for the gander, we'd all be geese. But no, there's geese and then there's ganders. So no, we're not the same, and I understand why there's a difference, but some people claim men and women are the same.
And let's take the other component of what Adam Schefter was saying, because he said, despite everything that we're hearing, it is his sense based on people that he talked to that despite everything that has happened, that the team still has a strong backing of their quarterback based on everything that they've seen from this part forward.
Now, this is a thing I've definitely seen with sports, and as I mentioned, yes, he also is an amazing athlete. He's one of the top at what he does in the world, and he has a backing with it. But I've seen this situation where African Americans have been disproportionately benefited from professional sports in the United States of America. So it's very interesting to see people in that field coming out and saying, "Oh, we've been treated like slaves." Like I've had some videos where just saying professional sports is not slavery. It's not like chattel slavery. It's disgusting to say that. But people do stick up for people. And I'm not saying, oh, just because you're in a position of privilege, or not privilege, of earned position of some power and some influence, you shouldn't use that power and influence for people who are not in that same position. But to claim that the NFL itself is one of the top sources of mistreating African Americans is a complete bold-faced lie.
His work in the community, the evolution that we've seen on the film, how he's established himself as a leader. But when you include this particular language in your release asserting the veracity, the credibility of what the Uber driver was saying, my concern too is, how is the community going to react? How are women's groups going to react?
Chanel mentioned some points here, and this is what I was talking about at the start, a black male virtue signaling for women. In general, in societies, women are the ones who organize the social norms, the social mores of any culture. If women accept something in a way it will be accepted by the people there. If women expect some sort of virtue signaling in order to give you access to their reproductive process, that will be what goes on. You look at inner city environments and that violence and things like that, the people who are violent are rewarded by access to females. If the women in the hood were just like, look, any gangsters, anybody selling drugs is not getting anywhere, drugs would be done. But that's not going to happen because it's a provision of resources and a mix of things like that. So yeah, I could just come out and say, oh, who really cares what women's groups are doing? They're not the target demographic for the NFL. And in an extent, yes, if the NFL starts targeting too much and worrying about what people who are not in their target demographics are thinking, or small percentages of that, they will start losing revenue, and as a business they'll focus more on the actual product they're creating. But I just want to make that point out, that yes, it does make sense for her to come out here and point what are women's groups thinking and just play off of that on general.
Because we're now in the full thrust of this Me Too movement and all of that. So even though you back him, and trust me, I understand, because to actually have the interpersonal interaction with Jameis, he's gracious, he's humble, he offers his time.
And right here, this is tough because that does happen. There's a lot of people who have been brought up in these situations where, oh, police shoot somebody or there's some crime has occurred. And people talk about, oh, he was a good kid. That whole trope of, oh, he didn't do nothing. He was a good boy. He little, what's it called? And this kind of situation, they're talking about are positive things that Jameis has done weighed against some of the negative things. I think one of the crimes was stealing crab legs or something from a restaurant. So talking about a long history of crimes, is it valid to include something like that altercation into this, which is something that's also brought up? People say some of the crimes that are put up in the whole rap sheet of African Americans and other repeat criminals should not necessarily be included. And then when it even goes down to the age of Jameis on that first incident, if you're a minor, it's normally not even put in your records if you actually were found guilty of it. So there's some things in there too.
You can see the growth as a leader, so you can understand that, but you have to compartmentalize this accusation and this suspension and this discipline associated with that as well.
Yep, also in agreement here, compartmentalization has definitely occurred in this situation, but people also don't want to compartmentalize the sort of situation that has occurred here. People want to generalize this as all sorts of assault, going from treating this the same as rape.
Where does this go in terms of how, people in the community, social activists, Me Too movement people, all those people, in terms of adding their voices to the conversation, then how strong is that backing going to be? Where does it go from here?
One thing, social activists, it's just crazy that that's actually an occupation now. People actually make a living doing this situation, and it's just, anyway. The Me Too thing, where does it go from now? I don't know. I think it should start with just realizing that athletes are, yes, they're very capable, they're very visual, they're very open out there in society, and we can see them, but let's not treat them like they're not human beings. If anything, they have a lower level of restraint on their actual behavior. Yes, they're a lot more public, but they have a lot more people in their life who stand from benefiting from reinforcing any negative things that may be in their life, as long as these negative things are seen to not directly impede the positive things they have.
Particularly when you're trying to include your thought process of what his future is with the organization.
I just accountability.
So right here, accountability. I agree with Damien, and he goes on to say accountability have some. And that's what I'm trying to talk about here. Is accountability a consistent thing? And no, it's not. And can it be? Can accountability ever be completely equal? I don't think so, because in most situations the parties involved are unequal individuals. So when you come to this situation, who is being held accountable? And just because people can share levels of accountability does not mean one is not more responsible for the situation than others. And accountability also differs depending on the kind of benefits that you are providing, the positives. As the female analyst had mentioned, people have to consider what he's done for the community versus the negative things that he's done.
Suspended 3 games for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy. If you want to get a final thought from our Damian Woody here in just a second, we want to see through the offseason, these are the notable players who are facing suspension.
Now here on this list of suspensions, there's 4 games for 4 different people for performance-enhancing drugs, and Jamies Winston has 3 games for conduct. Now, people go to say, oh, people care about drugs more than they care about the treatment of women. It's like, no. In this situation, I think the NFL should stick to things like PEDs, because that's a set thing that can be proven. If you have X substance in your body, you're violating this law, so this is the punishment. Some things, however, like this situation with Jamies Winston, are harder to prove. It's harder to find out. If somebody steals something, I know you took my vehicle, here it is on film. Now, if you had a sexual intercourse related thing, it's he said, she said, she said, he said. So it's a lot harder to prove who is responsible for what and who should be held accountable for what. Now, when it comes to these situations, should institutions like the NFL or colleges keep out of this? It's kind of impossible because they have a public-facing part. They are private institutions, but they're selling the product to the public. Now, I think if there's maybe some kind of way to protect the identity of people until the actual ruling has been found out, whether it's internal or some kind of external court ruling, then that might be better, but I don't know how to best deal with this situation. For now, it's still going to be a mess until things are figured out.
Stand as far as what the Bucks should do in the 3-game suspension.
Well, I didn't mince any words earlier in the show. I still feel the same way. I think the Bucks should cut him.
Yep.
I just feel like, again, I want to say, why does this pattern of behavior continue to follow James Winston? Explain that to me.
And right here, that question, why does this behavior continue to follow this person, Jamies Winston? I've asked this question, and a lot of people have been asking this question about a lot of young African-American males that have multiple interactions with law enforcement officers and then end up getting in situations where they get shot. People ask, why are they constantly interacting with police? And then people say, that doesn't matter, we're supposed to focus on the issues themselves. In this issue, this person was off. And both sides have some credibility there.
I don't want to hear anything about alcohol. There's a whole lot of people out here who, go out and have a good time, but they know how to conduct themselves accordingly. Why can't you?
Sometimes when you're drunk or when you're under drugs, effects, intoxicated, people say, are you under the influence? Because alcohol does have an influence, but it is your decision to take that alcohol. So it does play a part in this. And when you ask the situation, oh, I don't want to hear about past behavior, I don't want to hear about this, I don't want to hear about racism. A lot of people have interactions with police and they don't get in these kind of situations. If somebody brought up that argument when somebody's talking about the violence against African American males, this guy would probably freak out and say, no, you can't talk about that. There's other extenuating circumstances to be brought up in the actual situation that occurred. And I will reiterate here that when it comes to alcohol, when it comes to drunkenness, I'm not saying that men should be taken to the point when somebody says, oh, a woman is drunk, she can't consent, so I should say, oh, a man is drunk, he can't consent to actually engaging in intercourse or starting it. It's like, no. What should be brought is the level of responsibility should be brought up for both sides. Both sides should have responsibility on the actions they took in order to become intoxicated if you want to treat both sides as adults. Now, this technique of, oh, you want to make this person irresponsible, you want to take away responsibility for somebody, is also often brought up in abortion, which is, another topic that people will disagree with me over. But hey, here we go. So often people say, oh, you just don't want men to be responsible for their actions. That's why you're saying they should be able to just write off parental responsibility. It's like, no, my main issue in abortion is I want both parties to have close to some equal responsibility on deciding to engage in intercourse. That accountability from before, if you drink, you understand what could happen. Your decision making is dropped lower. If you drink and have sex, maybe you'll have sex, but if you have sex, you understand you can have a kid. If you commit a crime, you understand somebody can shoot you dead for it. So this is the whole situation. Accountability.
There's a pattern of behavior here that if I'm the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I would not be comfortable with. It would not be acceptable. So I'll make a move.
So again, here I've mentioned this in several videos. I support the firing of anyone for pretty much any reason whatsoever, as long as whatever agreement or contract that was agreed with is actually followed on a legal standpoint. I don't really care. You could just fire Jamies Winston because you don't like the way he talks. But if there's a provision in the actual contract saying, you have to do XYZ before I fire you, then you decide to fire him, then you still have to pay him the money and whatnot. And even if he does get dropped by the Buccaneers, he'll probably still get whatever millions he's supposed to get in this last year.
I do want to say, as bad as this is, and for me, this is an egregious thing to have happen, with there being some type of admission that something inappropriate happened.
Agreed here. Something inappropriate happened. We don't know exactly what.
There is no excusing that in any uncertain terms, but he does have the ability to try to turn it around from here.
And again, analyzing this issue is not excusing what Jamies did, but this reporter in general, this analyst, I've seen her in situations. There's one time she was talking with Richard Sherman. She's been defending people in the whole kneeling movement. Of course, she's mentioned the Me Too, so she has support on that. So I think she's trying to empathize, which I think females in general do a lot more in different, at least in different ways than males do about certain situations. And she's also, I think, a pro-black woman, so she is also coming into defense for this young black male. As you said before, he's 24.
And I do think, Damien and Dan, that includes having full accountability and full transparency of what happened. And maybe it doesn't have to be to the media. Yeah. Maybe it doesn't have to be us. But it definitely should come to your, the person that it happened to, your employer, and your higher power.
Yep, clap with this lady right here. And yeah, that's the thing. It's between you and the employer and the higher power if you have one. And the higher power doesn't necessarily have to be a deity. It could just be your own morality, your own conscience. And that does hold you accountable in some sense. Now, I think the media might be learning. I know this is a media show. They're selling a product. They have to talk about something. This was an entire probably hour session, if you're counting the commercials that were on, talking about this topic. It wasn't actual football. This is outside of the things, and they have to sell a product. So I do understand. But I think people are understanding that, hey, we don't really have the complete right to demand that we be told certain information. We can have the expectation from it, and then depending on what that person tells us, we can react on that. We can decide, if you're not willing to divulge X amount of information to me or explain your behavior, I'm not going to associate with you. But that whole situation of these activist groups and Me Too or these other people demanding other people behave exactly how they want, demanding they be told exactly what they want, I don't think that's quite accurate. Now, I think it does go different when you go talk about law enforcement, because they're supposed to be in the public sector. They're ostensibly working for you. So there's kind of situations like that. But there's a very murky line between this kind of situations. How much are private companies with private individuals accountable to the general public outside of maybe their shareholders or direct customers, etc., etc. So this is a whole mixed thing. So that's it. Thanks a lot for listening. Let me know what you guys think about this new format. And there's a lot more on this topic that I'm going to go on, and the whole like defining something, and then when you say it's one thing, it's also not these other things, and just the whole understanding. And I think the biggest thing, just let me know if you disagree with me or agree with me in the comments. I really enjoy having those interactions with people in the comments about the video. And like, share, and subscribe. Also links to the merchandise store, or the merchandise that was on. If you like this content, you can also help me out on Patreon if you want. But yeah, that's it for now, and goodbye.